The distress signal cut through the darkness of space like a scream. It bounced off satellites, burned through communication arrays, and finally reached the outer listening post near Neptune. The message was simple and desperate. Someone was dying out there among the stars, and they needed help. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the command chair of the monitoring station, his coffee growing cold in his hand. He had been watching the deep space scanners for 3 years, and nothing interesting had ever happened. Until now. The computer translated the alien language, and the words appeared on his screen. "We are the Valorian Empire. Our worlds are burning. The Scraith swarm consumes everything. 3 colonies are gone, millions dead. Our fleets are broken. If anyone can hear this message, please help us. We are dying." Lieutenant Amy Price stood next to him, her face pale. She had trained for this moment her entire career, but nothing prepared her for the reality of it. Real aliens existed, and they were being killed by other aliens. The universe was bigger and more dangerous than Earth had imagined. "Sir, we need to send this to Earth Command immediately," Amy said. Jake nodded and pressed the transmission button. The message would reach Earth in 4 hours. Then, the waiting would begin. On Earth, the High Council gathered in their chamber deep beneath Geneva. 50 years ago, humanity had nearly destroyed itself during the AI wars. Machines had turned against their creators, and the fighting had killed 2 billion people before the artificial intelligence was finally defeated. The survivors had learned a hard lesson. They unified under one government and swore never to be vulnerable again. Fleet Admiral Henry Blake reviewed the alien message for the 5th time. He was an old man now, with gray hair and scars from the AI wars covering his arms. He had seen humanity at its worst and at its best. He knew what desperation looked like. "The Valorians are 3 weeks away if we use the new jump gate technology," said Counselor Maria Santos. "But we don't know anything about them or their enemy. This could be a trap. Or it could be real, and we're listening to a species go extinct," Henry replied. His voice was calm but firm. "We built those warships for a reason. We trained those soldiers for a reason. If we ignore this, what does that make us?" The debate lasted 3 hours. Some counselors argued that Earth should stay hidden and protect itself. Others said that humanity had a duty to help. In the end, the vote was close, but the decision was made. Earth would respond to the distress call. Henry Blake was given command of the relief force, 12 warships, the best that Earth had built. 8,000 soldiers trained in combat methods that the rest of the galaxy had never seen. Weapons that had been developed in secret, designed to fight threats that might come from the stars. The fleet assembled at the jump gate within 2 days. The UEDF Valiant was the flagship, a massive warship covered in armor and bristling with railguns and missile tubes. Jake Morrison was transferred from his listening post to serve as the communications officer. Amy Price came with him. They stood on the bridge as the jump gate activated, tearing a hole through space itself. The journey took 3 days. When they emerged in Valorian space, the crew of the Valiant saw the truth of the distress call. 2 planets glowed red in the distance, their surfaces burning. Debris from destroyed ships floated everywhere. The scanners picked up hundreds of alien signals, both Valorian and Scraith. "Get me a communication channel to the Valorians," Henry ordered. A face appeared on the screen. It was alien, with 4 eyes and skin that looked like blue scales. The creature's exhaustion was obvious. His name was Zelthar, High Commander of what remained of the Valorian military. "You came," Zelthar said, and his voice broke with emotion. "We did not think anyone would answer." "We heard your message," Henry said. "Tell me about your enemy," Zelthar explained. "The Scraith were an insect species that consumed everything in their path. They had no interest in peace or negotiation. They simply ate and reproduced and moved to the next world. The Valorians had fought them for 8 months and lost every major battle." Their military doctrine emphasized honor and minimizing civilian casualties. The Scraith had no such concerns. "How many ships do you have?" Zelthar asked, looking at the human fleet with hope. 12 warships, 8,000 soldiers. The hope in Zelthar's eyes dimmed. The Scraith have thousands of ships, millions of warriors. I am grateful you came, but I do not see how such a small force can help us. Henry Blake leaned forward in his chair. His expression was cold and hard. "Commander Zelthar, you asked for help. We did not come here to help. We came here to win." The other humans on the bridge showed no reaction. They had served under Henry Blake long enough to know what those words meant. The Valorians were about to learn what humanity was capable of when they went to war. "I don't understand," Zelthar said. "You will," Henry replied. "Send us the coordinates of your most threatened colony. We'll start there." The coordinates came through. A world called Thraxis Prime, where 3 million Valorian civilians were trapped underground while the Scraith consumed everything on the surface. The Valorian fleet had tried to break through twice and failed both times. Too many civilians would die in the crossfire, so they had retreated. "Prepare for combat operations," Henry ordered. "All ships, battle formation. Launch all fighters. Marines, get to your dropships." Colonel Nathan Wells had been waiting for this order. He commanded 2,000 Marines, men and women who had trained for years in combat methods that most species would call brutal. They loaded into armored dropships, checking their weapons and equipment. Flamethrowers, explosive charges, railguns, and plasma cutters. Tools designed for one purpose: killing the enemy as efficiently as possible. "Listen up," Nathan said to his troops. "The Valorians are nice people. They fight with honor and worry about collateral damage. That's why they're losing. We don't have that luxury. Our job is to get those civilians out and kill every hostile on that planet. I don't care if we have to burn the whole surface to do it. Clear?" "Clear, sir," the Marines shouted back. The Valiant and its escort ships moved into orbit around Thraxis Prime. The Scraith fleet tried to intercept them, but the human ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything the insects had seen before. Railgun rounds punched through Scraith vessels, and missiles tracked their targets with perfect accuracy. On the bridge, Jake Morrison monitored all communication channels. He could hear the Scraith signals, alien and hostile. He could hear the Valorian broadcasts, desperate and afraid. And he could hear the calm, professional voices of the human pilots as they tore through the enemy fleet. "Dropships away," reported the tactical officer. Nathan Wells and his Marines plunged toward the surface of Thraxis Prime. The planet's sky was dark with Scraith flyers, but the dropships cut through them like bullets. Some Marines died when their ships were hit, but most made it to the ground. The real fighting began when they entered the Scraith tunnels. The insects had dug deep into the planet, creating a maze of passages where they bred and fed. The Marines moved through the darkness with thermal imaging and motion sensors. When they found the enemy, they showed no mercy. Sergeant Lisa Grant led her squad into a breeding chamber filled with Scraith eggs. The other soldiers hesitated for a moment, but Lisa did not. She activated her flamethrower and burned everything. The heat was so intense that the tunnel walls began to melt. "Keep moving," she ordered. "We have civilians to extract." Above the planet, Henry Blake watched the battle unfold on his tactical display. The Marines were pushing deep into the Scraith territory, but they were taking casualties. 47 dead so far, 109 wounded. The numbers were acceptable, but each one represented a human life lost. "Sir, we have a problem," said Lieutenant Commander Paul Harris. "The Scraith are bringing in reinforcements. If we don't do something, they'll overwhelm our ground forces." Henry studied the map. The Scraith staging grounds were located in a geologically unstable region. An idea formed in his mind, cold and calculated. Fire kinetic bombardment rounds into these coordinates, he ordered, marking several points on the map. Paul hesitated. Sir, that will cause massive seismic activity. The whole region could collapse. That's the idea. Execute the order. The Valiant's railguns fired metal rods at incredible speeds. They struck the planet's surface with the force of nuclear weapons, triggering earthquakes that rippled across the continent. 17% of the Scraith tunnel network collapsed, killing tens of thousands of the insects. Zelthar watched from his command ship, his 4 eyes wide with shock. What have you done? That level of destruction is... Effective, Henry interrupted. Your civilians are being evacuated now. The Scraith on Tharaxis Prime are finished. 12 hours after the first strike, the last transport ship lifted off from Tharaxis Prime. 3 million Valorian civilians were safe, crammed into cargo holds and refugee ships. Colonel Nathan Wells stood on the scorched surface, watching the dust settle over the ruined Scraith tunnels. His armor was covered in green blood and burn marks. Final count? Sir, reported Sergeant Lisa Grant. 47 Marines killed in action, 109 wounded. Enemy casualties estimated at 70,000 drones and 300 warriors. Nathan nodded. The numbers were better than he had expected. The Scraith fought hard, but they fought stupid. They used mass attacks with no real strategy, relying on overwhelming numbers. Against the Valorians, that had worked. Against humans who were willing to use flamethrowers and explosives in tight spaces, it was suicide. Load up, Nathan ordered. We're moving to the next target. On the bridge of the Valiant, Admiral Henry Blake reviewed intelligence reports. The Scraith communications had been intercepted and translated. For the first time in 8 months, the swarm was pulling back forces. They were consolidating their position, which meant they were afraid. Henry allowed himself a small smile. Fear was a weapon, and he knew how to use it. Commander Zelthar requested another communication. His holographic image appeared in front of Henry, and the Valorian commander looked troubled. Admiral Blake, I must protest your methods. The destruction on Tharaxis Prime was excessive. The seismic damage will affect that planet for decades. But your civilians are alive, Henry replied calmly. At what cost? We Valorians believe in fighting with honor, in protecting life wherever possible. What you did on that planet was... Effective, Henry interrupted. Commander, let me be clear. You asked us to save your species. You did not ask us to do it politely. Every second we waste arguing about honor is a second the Scraith used to dig in deeper. I have a job to do, and I intend to do it. Zelthar's 4 eyes stared at Henry for a long moment. I wonder if we called the right people. You called the only people who answered, Henry said, and ended the transmission. Jake Morrison had been listening to the conversation from his station. He glanced at Lieutenant Amy Price, who looked uncomfortable. The commander has a point, Jake said quietly. We're making them afraid of us. Good, Henry said without turning around. Fear of us means they're not thinking about the Scraith. Focus on your job, Captain. The human fleet split into 3 groups. Admiral Blake took the Valiant and 4 destroyers to hunt the Scraith Queen's hive ship. Commander Linda Shaw led another group to attack Scraith supply lines. Captain Jake Morrison received command of the 3rd group, tasked with establishing forward bases on liberated worlds. On the planet Cathara II, the cultural differences between humans and Valorians became impossible to ignore. Major Chris Palmer was in charge of ground operations, clearing the remaining Scraith presence from the southern continent. The insects had infested the forests, using the biomass to feed their growing numbers. Burn it, Chris ordered, pointing at a forest that stretched for hundreds of miles. The Valorian liaison officer, a young male named Vethic, stepped forward in shock. You cannot. That forest is 3,000 years old. Our people will need that land to farm when the war ends. "If you lose this war, you won't need farmland," Chris replied. "The Scraith are using that forest as a breeding ground. Every day we leave it standing, they get stronger. So we burn it." "This is madness. You are destroying our world to save it." Chris turned to face Vethik directly. "Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. Welcome to human warfare." The forest burned for 3 days. The flames could be seen from space. When it was over, the Scraith breeding ground was ash, and the insect forces on Cathara too were cut off from reinforcements. But Vethik looked at the blackened wasteland and wondered what kind of saviors humanity really was. Lieutenant Amy Price worked as a translator and cultural advisor, moving between human and Valorian units. She saw the impact of human methods on the aliens. Young Valorian soldiers watched the humans fight and asked to join their units. They wanted to learn how to be effective, how to win instead of losing with honor. One young Valorian, barely old enough to serve, approached Amy after a battle. His name was Kolrath, and his scales were still bright blue, not yet dulled by war. "I want to fight like the humans," Kolrath said. "Can you teach me?" Amy felt a chill. "Why would you want that?" "Because they win. My brother died defending a city. He followed all the rules, fought with honor, and he died. The humans don't follow rules. They do whatever it takes. I want to live." Amy reported the conversation to Captain Morrison. They were alone in his office on the forward base, and she spoke carefully. "Sir, we're changing them. The Valorians are starting to adopt our attitudes. They're learning to be ruthless." "That's not our problem," Jake replied, though he did not sound convinced. "Isn't it? We came here to save their civilization, but what if we save their species and destroy their culture? What if we turn them into something worse?" Jake had no answer. He filed Amy's report and sent it up the chain of command to Admiral Blake. The response came back within an hour. "Focus on the mission. Cultural concerns are secondary to survival." The hunt for the Scraith Queen's hive ship led Admiral Blake deep into enemy territory. The Queen controlled the primary swarm intelligence. Kill her, and the Scraith forces would lose coordination. It was a high-risk strategy, but Henry had built his career on high-risk strategies. The hive ship was massive, a living vessel grown from organic matter and reinforced with metal salvaged from destroyed Valorian ships. It drifted in the Cathara asteroid field, protected by hundreds of smaller Scraith vessels. A conventional attack would fail. Henry did not plan a conventional attack. "We're going to board it," he announced. Commander Linda Shaw, who had just returned from her successful raid on Scraith supply lines, stared at him. "Sir, that's suicide. The interior of that ship will be crawling with Scraith warriors. Which is why we're sending our best. Colonel Wells and 500 Marines in powered armor. They'll fight their way to the Queen's chamber and kill her. And if they fail? Then we ram the Valiant into the hive ship and detonate our reactor. Either way, the Queen dies." The plan was insane, but Nathan Wells accepted it without question. He had served under Henry Blake during the AI Wars. He knew the Admiral would not ask his people to do anything unless it was necessary. If Henry said the Queen had to die, then she had to die. The 500 Marines prepared for the boarding action. They wore powered armor that made them strong and fast, with weapons built into their suits. Each Marine carried enough explosives to level a building. They knew most of them would not come back. Sergeant Lisa Grant checked her squad one last time. She had 12 Marines under her command, good soldiers who had followed her through every battle. "Listen up. We're going into that thing, and it's going to be ugly. Stay together, watch your corners, and kill everything that moves. If you see the Queen, you call it in. Clear?" "Clear, Sergeant," they responded. The Valiant and its escorts punched through the Scraith defensive line. The human ships were smaller than the enemy vessels, but they were faster and hit harder. Railgun rounds tore through Scraith ships, and missiles tracked their targets with deadly accuracy. The path to the hive ship opened. Armored boarding pods launched from the Valiant carrying the 500 Marines. They struck the hive ship's hull like bullets, drilling through the organic armor and depositing the soldiers inside. The fighting began immediately. The interior of the hive ship was a nightmare. The walls were alive, pulsing with whatever passed for blood in Scraith biology. The corridors were narrow and dark, perfect ambush terrain. Warriors dropped from the ceiling and burst through the walls. The Marines fought them in brutal close combat. Nathan Wells led from the front, his powered armor crushing Scraith warriors as he pushed deeper into the ship. His helmet display showed the layout they had mapped from scanner data. The Queen's chamber was at the center of the ship, protected by layers of warriors and drones. "Push forward," Nathan ordered over the radio. "Don't stop for anything." Sergeant Lisa Grant's squad encountered a breeding chamber filled with eggs. One of her Marines hesitated, but Lisa did not. She burned them all with her flamethrower. They were here to kill the Queen and break the swarm. Mercy was a luxury they could not afford. The fighting lasted 18 hours. The Marines carved a path through the hive ship, leaving bodies and fire in their wake. When they finally reached the Queen's chamber, they found her surrounded by her elite guards. She was massive, 3 times the size of a normal Scraith warrior, with intelligence burning in her alien eyes. The final battle was desperate and bloody. Marines fell under the claws and acid spray of the elite guards. Nathan Wells fought his way to the Queen herself, his armor cracked and leaking. He planted a plasma charge directly into her cerebral chamber and set the timer. "All units, fall back," Nathan ordered. 30 seconds to detonation." The surviving Marines ran for the boarding pods, but Nathan's armor was too damaged. He could not move fast enough. He knew he would not make it out. "Wells, get moving." Henry Blake's voice crackled over the radio. "Negative, sir. Someone has to make sure this charge goes off. Get the others out." "That's an order, Colonel." "And I'm refusing it, Admiral." "It's been an honor, sir." Nathan Wells died when the plasma charge detonated, vaporizing the Queen and rupturing the hive ship's core. The surviving Marines made it back to the Valiant, 337 out of 500. The losses were staggering, but the mission was complete. Across 3 star systems, the Scraith forces suddenly lost coordination. The swarm began to fragment without the Queen's controlling intelligence. For the first time since the war began, the Valorians were winning. The death of the Queen changed everything. The Scraith swarm lost its central intelligence, and the unified threat broke apart into dozens of smaller hive minds. For the Valorians, this was good news. For Admiral Henry Blake, it created a new problem. Smaller hive minds were harder to predict and track. The enemy became more scattered and desperate. "They're hitting civilian targets now," Commander Linda Shaw reported. "Random attacks on agricultural worlds, mining colonies, anywhere they can find biomass. They're not following any strategy we can identify." Henry studied the tactical map in his ready room. Red markers indicated Scraith activity across 7 systems. The insects were dying, but they would take as many Valorians with them as possible. He needed to end this quickly. "We need to draw them out," Henry said. "Force them to commit to a single target where we can destroy them all at once." "How do you propose we do that?" Linda asked. "We use bait." Captain Jake Morrison received the orders 2 hours later. He read them 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood. He had not. Admiral Blake wanted to use Valorian civilians as bait to draw in the Scraith forces. The plan was tactical genius and moral nightmare combined. Jake called for Lieutenant Amy Price. She arrived quickly, and he showed her the orders without saying anything. Her face went pale as she read. "He can't be serious," Amy said. "He's completely serious. I'm supposed to take the colony of Praxis 7, evacuate 90% of the population, and leave 10,000 volunteers behind with a Marine regiment. Then we broadcast false distress signals and wait for the Scraith to attack. That's using people as bait. That's exactly what we condemned other species for doing." Jake nodded. "I know, but the math works. If we can draw in multiple hive minds at once, we can end this war in one battle. If we keep chasing scattered forces, this could drag on for years. And those 10,000 volunteers, what happens to them? We defend them with everything we have. The Admiral claims we can protect them if we position our forces correctly. Claims, not guarantees. Jake stood and walked to the window of his office. Outside, he could see Valorian refugees boarding transport ships. Families torn apart by war, children who had watched their worlds burn. If we don't end this fast, millions more will die. What's the right choice, Amy? She had no answer for him. Commander Zelthar learned of the plan when Jake requested the list of agricultural colonies. The Valorian commander's reaction was immediate and furious. He demanded a video conference with Admiral Blake. "This is unconscionable," Zelthar said, his 4 eyes blazing with anger. "You want to use our civilians as bait. You want to put them in danger deliberately." "I want to end this war," Henry replied calmly. "Every day we delay, your people die. This plan can bring all the remaining Scraith forces to one location where we can eliminate them. At what cost? How many of those volunteers will actually survive? That depends on how well Captain Morrison executes the plan." "That is not an answer. You are gambling with lives." Henry leaned forward and his voice became hard. "Commander, I am gambling with 10,000 lives to save millions. That is the calculation. If you have a better plan, I am listening." Zelthar had no better plan. The Valorian military had tried conventional warfare and lost. The human methods were brutal, but they worked. He gave his approval, though the decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. Praxis 7 was a farming colony with a population of 120,000. The fields of golden grain stretched to the horizon, and the air smelled of growing things. It was peaceful and beautiful, which made what was about to happen even worse. Jake Morrison landed with 3,000 Marines and began the evacuation. The announcement was carefully worded. Most citizens would be moved to safety, but volunteers were needed to help maintain the infrastructure while the military prepared defenses. 10,000 Valorians stepped forward, and Jake felt sick knowing what he was asking of them. The volunteers were not stupid. They understood they were being used as bait, but they also understood that their sacrifice might end the war. One elderly Valorian farmer named Kethris spoke for many of them. "We have lost so much already," Kethris said to Jake. "Our children, our homes, our future. If standing here can stop the Screeth from taking anything more, then we stand here." Major Chris Palmer positioned the Marine forces to appear weak and vulnerable. They dug in around the main settlement but left obvious gaps in their defenses. They broadcast distress signals claiming the colony was underdefended and running low on supplies. The trap was set. "Now we wait," Jake said. The Scraith took the bait. 5 separate hive minds detected the signals and moved toward Praxis 7. They came from different directions, their fleets uncoordinated but numerous. Thousands of ships carrying hundreds of thousands of warriors. It was exactly what Admiral Blake had hoped for. Jake watched the enemy approach on his tactical display. His hands were steady, but his stomach churned. 10,000 civilians were counting on him to protect them. If he failed, their blood would be on his hands. "All units, hold position," Jake ordered. "Let them commit fully before we spring the trap." The Scraith ships entered orbit and began landing forces. They poured down onto Praxis 7 like a dark rain. The Marines held their positions, firing just enough to appear desperate, but not enough to drive the enemy back. The Scraith pushed forward, sensing victory. Sergeant Lisa Grant crouched in a trench with her squad, watching the insects advance. There were so many of them. For a moment, she wondered if the Admiral's plan had been too clever. Then Jake Morrison's voice came over the radio. "All units, execute trap protocol. Orbital batteries, fire at will." The sky lit up with railgun fire. The Valiant and its escort ships had been hiding behind Praxis 7's moon, and now they emerged with weapons blazing. The Scraith ships in orbit were caught completely off guard. Within minutes, half of them were burning debris. On the ground, the Marines counterattacked. They emerged from hidden positions and hit the Scraith forces from 3 sides at once. The insects suddenly found themselves surrounded and cut off from reinforcements. The slaughter began. Jake coordinated the battle from his command post, watching the data streams and adjusting positions in real time. The plan was working, but it was close. Too close. A breakthrough on the eastern flank almost reached the civilian shelters before Major Palmer redirected 2 companies of Marines to plug the gap. The fighting lasted 8 hours. When it was over, the Scraith forces on Praxis 7 were annihilated. 5 hive minds destroyed, hundreds of thousands of warriors dead. The Marine casualties were acceptable. 93 killed, 217 wounded. The civilian casualties were 0. Not a single volunteer had been harmed. Jake Morrison should have felt relief. Instead, he felt only exhaustion and a deep unease. The plan had worked perfectly, but it had been pure luck that kept the civilians safe. If the Scraith had broken through at any other point, if the timing had been off by even a few minutes, those 10,000 volunteers would have been massacred. Sergeant Lisa Grant found him sitting alone in his command post hours after the battle ended. "Sir, are you all right?" "We used people as bait, Sergeant. We gambled with their lives and won. But it was still gambling." "They volunteered, sir. They knew the risks." "That doesn't make it right." Lisa sat down next to him. "Sir, can I speak freely?" Jake nodded. "I've been thinking about this a lot, about what we're doing here and what it's costing. The Valorians asked for help and we're giving it to them. But we're also changing them. I've seen young Valorian soldiers watching us fight. They're learning from us, and I'm not sure that's a good thing." "What do you mean?" "They're learning that the ends justify the means, that acceptable losses are acceptable, that you can do anything as long as you win. Is that really what we want to teach them?" Jake had no answer. He filed his after-action report to Admiral Blake, noting the tactical success and the 0 civilian casualties. The Admiral's response was quick and positive. He congratulated Jake on excellent execution and immediately began planning similar operations. Lieutenant Amy Price had been on the ground during the battle, coordinating with Valorian volunteers. She saw their faces when the trap was sprung and the Scraith were destroyed. They were grateful to be alive, but they were also disturbed by the methods used to save them. One volunteer, a young female named Shalera, spoke to Amy afterward. "You humans are strange. You risked yourselves to save us, but you also used us to kill your enemy. I do not know if we should thank you or fear you." Amy reported this conversation to Captain Morrison. "Sir, we have a problem. The Valorians are grateful, but they're also becoming afraid of us. We're winning the war, but we're losing their trust." "Does the Admiral know about this?" "I've been sending reports. He acknowledges them but doesn't change anything. He says cultural concerns are secondary to survival." Jake looked at Amy for a long moment. "What do you think? Are we doing the right thing?" "I think we're doing the effective thing. Whether it's right, I honestly don't know anymore." That night, Jake Morrison lay awake in his quarters. He thought about Nathan Wells, who had died killing the Queen. He thought about the 47 Marines who died on Thraxis Prime. He thought about the 10,000 Valorian volunteers who had stood as bait. All of them had risked everything, and the war was almost over. But what would be left when it ended? The Valorians would survive, but they would be changed. They had learned that victory came at a price, and sometimes that price was your own humanity. Admiral Henry Blake reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The Scraith forces were in full retreat. Only one major concentration remained, their stronghold in the asteroid belt of the Valorian home system. It was their last defensive position, and they had fortified it heavily. 17 asteroids converted into hive fortresses, connected by organic bridges and protected by millions of warriors. A conventional assault would take months and cost thousands of lives. Henry Blake did not plan a conventional assault. He called his senior officers to a meeting. Commander Linda Shaw, Captain Jake Morrison, Major Chris Palmer, and Lieutenant Amy Price all attended via holographic link. Henry showed them his plan, and they fell silent. "Sir," Linda finally said, "that will destroy the entire asteroid belt." "Yes," Henry replied. "It will also destroy the last major Screath force in one strike. The war will be over." "At what cost?" Amy asked quietly. Henry looked at each of his officers in turn. "At the cost of finishing what we came here to do. We promised to save the Valorians. This is how we do it." The plan was simple in concept and catastrophic in execution. Admiral Henry Blake wanted to redirect a small moon into the asteroid belt at relativistic speed. The impact would shatter the Scraith stronghold and end the war in a single devastating blow. The collateral damage would be immense and long-lasting. Commander Linda Shaw ran the calculations 3 times, hoping she had made an error. She had not. "Sir, the gravitational disruption alone will affect the Valorian home system for generations. Tidal forces, orbital mechanics, everything will be thrown off balance. And that's before we consider the debris field." "I understand the consequences," Henry replied. "Show me an alternative that ends this war faster with fewer casualties." Linda had no alternative. None of them did. The Scraith had turned 17 asteroids into fortress hives, each one containing thousands of warriors and breeding chambers. A conventional assault would require the fleet to take each asteroid one at a time, fighting through layers of defenders. The casualties would be enormous. "How long until we can execute?" Henry asked. 3 weeks to position the gravitational drivers, another week to build up sufficient velocity. Make it happen." The Valorian government learned of the plan when Henry requested permission to deploy equipment on their moon. High Commander Zelthar called an emergency session of the Valorian Council. The debate lasted for 2 full days. Councillor Nathara spoke against the plan. "This is too much. The humans have saved us, but now they want to permanently alter our home system. What gives them the right?" "They have the right because we gave it to them," Zelthar replied wearily. "We asked for their help. We gave them operational authority. Now we must accept the consequences." "Even if those consequences doom our descendants?" "Our descendants will exist because of this. If we refuse, the Scraith will rebuild. They will attack again. And next time, the humans might not be here to save us." The vote was close, 53 in favor, 47 against. The human plan was approved, but the decision split the Valorian government. Some saw it as necessary survival. Others saw it as selling their future to buy their present. Colonel Nathan Wells would have led the operation to install the gravitational drivers, but he was dead. The honor fell to Major Chris Palmer, who had distinguished himself throughout the campaign. Chris took 300 Marines and a team of engineers to the moon's surface. The gravitational drivers were massive machines, each one the size of a building. They worked by manipulating gravity fields, slowly pushing the moon out of its orbit and onto a collision course with the asteroid belt. The installation took 3 weeks of backbreaking work in hostile conditions. The Scraith knew something was happening. They launched desperate attacks trying to stop the operation. Suicide ships filled with warriors crashed into the moon's surface. Chris and his Marines fought them off, day after day, while the engineers worked frantically to complete the installation. Sergeant Lisa Grant lost half her squad during one attack. A Scraith heavy assault team broke through their perimeter and reached the engineering site. Lisa and her remaining Marines held them off long enough for the engineers to evacuate, but the cost was high. "I'm running out of soldiers," Lisa reported to Chris. "If they hit us again, I don't know if we can hold." "They won't get another chance," Chris replied. "The drives are almost complete. On the final day, the Scraith launched their largest attack yet. Hundreds of assault pods rained down on the moon, each one carrying elite warriors. The Marines were outnumbered 5-1. The fighting was brutal and close quarters, with no room for tactics or strategy. It was just survival. Lieutenant Commander Paul Harris piloted the evacuation shuttles, making run after run to pull Marines off the moon's surface as positions were overrun. He ignored the anti-aircraft fire and the swarms of Scraith flyers trying to shoot him down. He would not leave anyone behind. Chris Palmer was the last human to leave the moon. He stood in the control room watching the countdown. The gravitational drives were active and building power. In 10 seconds, they would fully engage, and nothing could stop the moon's trajectory. Behind him, Scraith warriors pounded on the sealed door. "Colonel Palmer, get out of there!" Paul's voice crackled over the radio. 5 seconds. I have to make sure it activates." "It will activate. Move your behind, sir." The drives engaged with a deep thrumming that Chris felt in his bones. The moon shuddered beneath his feet as it began its long acceleration. Chris ran for the landing pad where Paul waited with the last shuttle. The Scraith burst through the door behind him, but he made it to the shuttle with seconds to spare. From orbit, the human fleet and the Valorian ships watched the moon begin its journey. It would take 2 weeks to reach impact velocity. During that time, the Scraith tried everything to stop it. They sent ships to attack the gravitational drives. They attempted to redirect the moon with their own gravity manipulation. Nothing worked. The moon was too massive, and the human drives were too powerful. Captain Jake Morrison used those 2 weeks to evacuate every Valorian within 10 light minutes of the impact zone. Millions of civilians were moved to safe positions. The logistics were nightmare, but Jake had learned a lot about moving people during this war. He got it done. Lieutenant Amy Price worked with Valorian scientists explaining what would happen when the moon struck the asteroid belt. The scientists were horrified by the calculations. The debris field would persist for centuries. The gravitational changes would affect their entire home system. Some of their outer colonies might become uninhabitable. "This is too much," one scientist said to Amy. "You are trading our future for our present." "Would you prefer not to have a future at all?" Amy replied, though the words tasted bitter. The day of impact arrived. Admiral Henry Blake gave the order for all ships to retreat to minimum safe distance. The Valorian government declared a system-wide moment of silence. 3 billion Valorians watched their screens as the moon, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, struck the asteroid belt. The impact was visible from 100 light-years away. The moon shattered 17 asteroids in an instant, releasing energy equivalent to a supernova. The Scraith stronghold, their final defensive position, ceased to exist. Millions of warriors died in the blink of an eye. The shock wave expanded outward, obliterating everything in its path. Sergeant Lisa Grant watched from the Valiant's observation deck. She had fought the Scraith in tunnels and trenches, had burned their hives and killed their warriors. This was different. This was not combat. This was annihilation on a cosmic scale. "Is this what victory looks like?" she asked quietly. Major Chris Palmer stood next to her. His armor was scarred from the fighting on the moon, and he had not slept in 2 days. "Yes, this is what it takes to win." The asteroid belt was gone, replaced by a slowly expanding cloud of debris. The gravitational effects began immediately. Tidal forces on the Valorian homeworld increased by 12%. The orbits of 3 outer planets shifted slightly. It would take decades to fully understand all the consequences. But the Scraith threat was over. The swarm was extinct in Valorian space. Not a single hive mind remained. The war was won. Commander Zelthar requested a final meeting with Admiral Blake. The 2 commanders met in person this time, aboard the Valiant. Zelthar looked old now, his blue scales dulled by exhaustion and stress. The war had aged him 20 years in 8 months. You did what you promised, Zelthar said. You saved my species from extinction. That was the mission, Henry replied. But at what cost? My people are alive, but we are changed. Our young soldiers fight like humans now. They use your weapons, your tactics, your attitudes. They have learned to be efficient killers. They have learned that victory justifies any method. They learn to survive. That's all that matters. Is it? Zelthar's 4 eyes fixed on Henry. Admiral Blake, I am grateful for what you have done, but I am also terrified of what we have become. We asked for help and you gave it, but you also gave us something we did not ask for. You gave us your way of war. Henry was quiet for a moment. Commander, you asked us to save you from the Scraith. You did not specify how. We did what was necessary. If that changed your people, that is not something I can apologize for. I am not asking for an apology. I am asking if you understand what you have done. I understand perfectly. I turned your people into survivors instead of victims. The rest is your problem to solve. Zelthar left the meeting feeling hollow. His people were saved, but he was not sure they deserved to be. Not at this price. Captain Jake Morrison gathered his senior staff for a final briefing before the fleet's departure. Lieutenant Amy Price, Sergeant Lisa Grant, Major Chris Palmer, and Lieutenant Commander Paul Harris all attended. The Valorian government has formally thanked us, Jake said. They're throwing a victory celebration. Admiral Blake has declined to attend, and I think we should as well. Why? Paul asked. We won. They're alive because of us. Because we're not heroes, Lisa said quietly. We're the people who did what heroes wouldn't do. There's a difference. Amy nodded. I've been talking to Valorian civilians. They're grateful, but they're also afraid of us. They've seen what we're capable of. They know we used methods their own military would never have approved. Those methods saved their lives, Chris said. Yes, and they will never forget that, or forgive us for it. Jake looked at his team. We came here to save a species from extinction. We did that, but we also showed them something about themselves. We showed them that survival sometimes requires becoming something you hate. That lesson will shape their civilization for generations. Is that a bad thing? Paul asked. I don't know, Jake admitted. I honestly don't know. The human fleet prepared to depart. Admiral Henry Blake reviewed the final casualty reports. 394 humans had died during the campaign. 821 were wounded. The Scraith losses were estimated at several million. The Valorian civilization had survived, though permanently changed by the methods used to save it. Henry felt no guilt about what he had done. He had been given a mission: save the Valorians. He had completed that mission using every tool at his disposal. If the Valorians were uncomfortable with his methods, that was their problem. But late at night, alone in his quarters, Henry sometimes wondered what Nathan Wells would have thought. Nathan had died following orders, believing the mission was righteous. Would he have approved of using civilians as bait? Would he have supported destroying the asteroid belt? Henry would never know. The jump gate activated, tearing a hole through space. The human fleet prepared to return to Earth. As they departed Valorian space, every member of the crew carried the weight of what they had done. They had saved a species, but they had done it in ways that would haunt them forever. The human fleet assembled at the jump gate 3 days after the asteroid belt's destruction. 12 warships had answered the Valorian distress call. 11 would return home. The 12th, the destroyer Defiant, had been lost with all hands during the assault on the Scraith supply lines. 237 names added to the memorial wall. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the Valorian homeworld grow smaller on the view screen. Cities covered the surface now, their lights bright against the darkness of space. Those cities would still be there because of what humanity had done. That should have felt like enough. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," reported Lieutenant Amy Price. "It's High Commander Zelthar. He's requesting a final conversation before we depart." Jake considered refusing. What more was there to say? But he nodded, and Zelthar's holographic image appeared before him. The Valorian commander looked even older than he had 3 days ago. "Captain Morrison, I wanted to speak with you before you left. Not as a military commander, but as someone who has seen what this war has done to both our peoples." "What did you want to say?" Jake asked. "Thank you." "And I am sorry." Jake frowned. "Sorry for what?" "For asking you to save us. I know that sounds strange. We would be extinct without you. But I have been thinking about the cost. Not the cost to us, but the cost to you. You came here and fought our war using methods that clearly trouble you. I see it in your face, Captain. You are not proud of what you have done." Jake was quiet for a moment. "We did what was necessary." "Yes, and that is the tragedy. You are good people who did terrible things because we asked for your help. That burden should not have been yours to carry. Would you have preferred we not answer your distress call?" "No, but I wish we had never needed to make that call in the first place." The transmission ended, and Jake was left staring at empty air. Lieutenant Amy Price approached him quietly. "Sir, I've been compiling reports from the Valorian population. Public opinion about us is split almost evenly. Half see us as saviors, the other half see us as necessary monsters." "And which half is right?" Jake asked. "Both. That's the problem." The jump gate activated, and the human fleet began its journey home. The trip would take 3 days, 3 days, for the crew to process what they had experienced. Sergeant Lisa Grant spent the time in the ship's gym, working out until her muscles screamed. Physical pain was easier to deal with than the memories. Major Chris Palmer wrote letters to the families of the Marines who had died under his command. 394 letters, each one carefully personalized. He wrote about bravery and sacrifice, about missions accomplished and goals achieved. He did not write about the burning forests or the civilian bait or the asteroid belt's destruction. Those were not things that would comfort grieving families. Lieutenant Commander Paul Harris sat in the pilot's ready room reviewing flight recorder data from the evacuation of the moon. He watched himself dodge anti-aircraft fire, watched himself pull Marines from overrun positions with seconds to spare. He should have felt proud. Instead, he felt tired. Admiral Henry Blake called a senior staff meeting on the second day of the journey. Commander Linda Shaw, Captain Jake Morrison, Major Chris Palmer, and the other surviving officers assembled in the conference room. "I've been reviewing the after-action reports," Henry said. "The Valorian campaign was a complete success by every measurable metric. The primary objective was achieved. The Scraith swarm is extinct in their space. Allied casualties were within acceptable parameters. Strategic goals were met ahead of schedule." "So why does everyone in this room look like we lost?" Linda asked. Henry's expression was unreadable. "Because winning is not always satisfying. We used methods that were necessary but uncomfortable. That discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that we are still human." "Sir, I have a question," Jake said. "The Valorians are changed because of us. Their young soldiers are adopting our tactics and attitudes. Are we responsible for what that civilization becomes?" "No," Henry replied firmly. "We gave them survival. What they do with it is their choice. We cannot control how other species evolve or what lessons they learn from their experiences." "But we influenced those experiences," Amy said quietly. "We showed them that ruthless methods work. That might shape their entire future. Or it might not. Civilizations are complex. They take what they need and discard the rest. The Valorians will find their own path. Our responsibility was to make sure they had the chance to find it." The meeting ended without resolution. Some officers accepted Henry's logic. Others remained troubled. There were no easy answers. only the knowledge that they had done what they believed was necessary. Earth's High Council was waiting when the fleet emerged from the jump gate. The returning ships were met with military honors and public celebration. Humanity had answered a distress call from the stars and saved an alien species from extinction. The politicians called it humanity's finest hour. The crew knew better. Jake Morrison attended the medal ceremony because it was required. He stood on the stage while Fleet Admiral Henry Blake pinned decorations on his chest. The crowd cheered. Cameras recorded everything. Jake smiled for the pictures and said the appropriate words. Inside, he felt hollow. Afterward, he found Sergeant Lisa Grant standing alone outside the ceremony hall. She was in her dress uniform, looking uncomfortable. I keep thinking about that breeding chamber, Lisa said without preamble. The one on Thraxis Prime. I burned those eggs without hesitation. They were just eggs, not combatants. But I killed them anyway because it was tactically sound. They would have become warriors, Jake said. I know. And I would make the same choice again. That's what bothers me. I've become someone who can burn eggs and sleep at night. Does that make you a monster? I don't know. Does it make me human? They stood in silence for a while. There were no good answers to these questions. Lieutenant Amy Price left military service 6 months after returning to Earth. She took a teaching position at the University of Geneva, where she lectured on xenopsychology and first contact protocols. Her classes were always full because she had real experience with alien species. She taught her students about the Valorians and the Scraith. She taught them about cultural differences and communication challenges. But she also taught them about the responsibility that came with power, about the choices that seemed necessary in the moment but haunted you afterward. The Valorians asked for help, Amy told her students. We gave them survival, but we also gave them trauma, cultural disruption, and permanent changes to their home system. We cannot separate the help from the harm. That is the reality of intervention. Major Chris Palmer stayed in the military, but requested a transfer to Training Command. He did not want to fight anymore. Instead, he taught new Marines about combat tactics and strategic thinking. His classes were notoriously difficult because he demanded his students think about consequences as well as objectives. Any idiot can win a battle by using overwhelming force, Chris told his students. The hard part is winning in a way you can live with afterward. That is what separates soldiers from killers. Admiral Henry Blake retired from active service 2 years after the Valorian campaign. He had served humanity for 40 years, first in the AI wars and then in the expansion to the stars. He had made difficult decisions and lived with their consequences. Now he was tired. He gave one final interview before his retirement. A journalist asked him about the Valorian campaign and whether he regretted any of his decisions. I regret that those decisions were necessary, Henry said, but I do not regret making them. The Valorians are alive because we did what their own military could not do. If that makes us uncomfortable, that is a price worth paying. Some critics say you turned the Valorians into something they were not meant to be. Civilizations are not static. They adapt to survive. The Valorians learned from us, just as we learned from them. That is not corruption. That is growth. And if they become as ruthless as humans, Henry smiled without humor, then they will be survivors, and in this universe, that counts for something. The Valorian civilization rebuilt slowly. The destroyed colonies were reestablished. The damaged worlds healed. But the culture was permanently changed. The generation that had fought alongside humans created a new military doctrine based on human principles. Efficiency over honor, victory over appearance, results over methods. Some older Valorians protested these changes. They argued that their species was losing its soul, becoming too much like the humans who had saved them. The younger generation disagreed. They had seen what hesitation and honor got you. extinction. They chose survival instead. High Commander Zelthar lived for another 15 years. He watched his species adopt human tactics and attitudes. He watched them become effective and dangerous. On his deathbed, surrounded by family, he was asked if he regretted calling for help. "Every day," Zelthar said, "and not at all. We are alive because of them. My grandchildren exist because of them. But we are not the people we were supposed to be. We are what they made us. I do not know if that is good or bad. I only know it was necessary." The story of the Valorian campaign spread through the galaxy. Other species heard about the aliens who called for help and the humans who arrived mercilessly. They heard about the brutal methods and the successful outcome. They heard about a species that was saved but forever changed. When other civilizations faced existential threats, they had to make a choice. Some chose to fight their own way and accept defeat. Others called for human assistance, knowing what that would mean. Earth's response was always the same. They would help, but they would do it their way. Captain Jake Morrison eventually wrote a book about the Valorian campaign. It was not a celebration or a justification. It was an honest account of what happened and why. The final chapter was titled The Weight of Salvation. "We saved the Valorians from extinction," Jake wrote. "We also robbed them of the chance to save themselves in their own way. We gave them life, but took something else in return. Perhaps that is always the cost of intervention. Perhaps there is no way to help without changing. I do not have answers to these questions. I only have the memory of what we did and the knowledge that we would probably do it again if asked. That is what makes us human. That is what makes us dangerous." Sergeant Lisa Grant never wrote about her experiences. She kept her thoughts private, locked away in journals that no one else would read. But she stayed in contact with the other veterans of the Valorian campaign. They met once a year, always on the anniversary of the asteroid belt's destruction. They did not celebrate. They simply gathered and remembered. They remembered the soldiers who died. They remembered the choices they made. They remembered what it cost to win. And they carried that weight together because no one else could understand. Lieutenant Commander Paul Harris became a flight instructor. He taught thousands of pilots over the years, passing on the skills that had kept him alive. Sometimes his students asked about the Valorian campaign. Paul always gave the same answer. "We did what we had to do. Whether that was right or wrong, I will leave for history to decide. All I know is that when someone called for help, we answered, and we made sure they survived. If that makes us heroes or monsters, it does not change the outcome. The Valorians are still alive. That has to count for something." 50 years after the Valorian campaign, Earth received another distress call. This time it came from a species called the Drathan, who were losing a war against an aggressive neighbor. The High Council debated for days about how to respond. Fleet Admiral Sarah Collins, who had been a junior officer during the Valorian campaign, addressed the council. "We know what answering this call means. We know the methods we will use and the consequences they bring. We know we will change the Drathans just as we change the Valorians. The question is, do we answer anyway?" The vote was close. In the end, humanity decided to answer, because that was what they did. When aliens called for help, humans arrived. Maybe not the way those aliens expected. Maybe not in a way that made anyone comfortable. But they arrived and they won, and they dealt with the consequences afterward. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Survival, purchased at the cost of innocence. Victory, tainted by the methods used to achieve it. Help, delivered by those willing to become monsters so others did not have to. The universe was a dangerous place. Species went extinct every day. But when the Valorians called for help, humans answered mercilessly. And because of that, the Valorians still existed. Whether that was a blessing or a curse would be debated for generations. But it was undeniably true. In the end, that truth was all that mattered. The aliens called for help, the humans came, and the galaxy would never be the same.